Hi, I'm Vivek Kartha, and welcome to Deconstructed. Every episode, we're discussing the future of the world's largest asset class, real estate, through the eyes of the people who live and breathe it. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started. Today's episode is brought to you by Workspace. Workspace has built a better way to manage real estate without all the clicks. With a suite of modern, intuitive products for commercial real estate operators, Workspace reduces the friction between assets, data, and people, allowing CRE professionals to streamline all their daily operations across property management, asset management, and beyond. Learn more at www.goworkspace.com. We're here today with Steve Fitzmaurice, the SVP of Hunt Property Solutions, based in Buffalo, New York. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Steve, I want to start. We had a really interesting conversation before we hopped on the podcast about your point of view and perspective on where the last year has taken us and what you're seeing in your market for the next handful of months or years.
The last year was difficult at times. We felt like we were under a lot of pressure because suddenly we became everybody's COVID consultant. All of our different accounts were looking for us to tell them exactly how to prepare their facilities for COVID. It was difficult because at the time we were managing or providing property management services to the Buffalo Philharmonic, the mansion that they occupy, a historic social club, medical facility, commercial office building, and some things translated well from one of those to the other, but it wasn't consistent throughout. And here at the Brisbane building, where we have our headquarters, initially we wanted to make the building safe for the quote unquote essential businesses that wanted to come in to the office every day. So we took quite a few initiatives to make people feel as safe as possible coming to the office. We never really went home. We've been here through the whole thing. Then after 4 or 5 months, when we had put all the safeguards in, then you start thinking about the industry and what's going to happen post-COVID. We had some issues with retail tenants because there really wasn't any pedestrian traffic around downtown Buffalo. But we just renewed our lease with our largest retail tenant, a 15,000 square foot department store. So they're with us for another 4 years. So they obviously have faith in the area. But from an office space standpoint, I think we've more than held our own. We've got 4 or 5 new tenants. We've had a few lease renewals. We've had numerous lease extensions and expansions because people have been doing well. Our building is within a few blocks of the courts. Even though things got strange in the legal world without in-court sessions, closings still had to happen on real estate and so on and so forth. So things are still going on. And some of our law firms were doing incredibly well and they needed to expand. One of our tenants is a commercial bank. They're taking 50% more square footage than they had before. So it's good. And I think our ownership has taken the view that this quiet time is a time for us to really cement our place in the marketplace and provide some revitalization in the building so that we're competitive in what could be a more difficult market when things get back to normal. Because I'm sure some people have looked at their office space and just think, gosh, I don't need 5,000 square feet anymore. I can get by with 2,500 or 3,000 square feet. We want to be ready for that, but we also want to position the building so we can get an incremental increase in our leasing rates because we've really fixed up the building and it looks the part.
At that word you used, revitalization, as we were getting to know one another, it sounds like the story of Buffalo over the last 15, 20 years has been one of revitalization. I was fascinated by that story. Mm-hmm. For those of us out there who are less familiar with Buffalo and that renaissance and how it's prepared the city for something as unpreparable like this pandemic, as you were living through those years and seeing that progress getting made, what were you observing that was making you gain confidence, optimism, and looking back, how did you observe that trajectory in real time?
Buffalo is an interesting city in that we don't seem to have big booms and busts. Like it or not, we're fairly dependent on government to do certain things here, but there were certain things that we knew if we took care of them, things could be much, much better. So one of the things that the public really came forth on the waterfront revitalization. As I mentioned to you before, our waterfront was really an industrial waterfront. What's now the Buffalo River was originally the Buffalo Creek, and it was dredged to a depth of 26 feet to allow lake freighters to come in and drop off their grain or whatever other goods they were transporting. People wanted to restore or preserve the history that's here. I mentioned to you before that the Port of Buffalo has seen more immigrants come through our waterfront than went through Ellis Island because people would get off the boats that took them through the Erie Canal and get on a ship that could take them through the Great Lakes to the Midwest. The state had proposed this really sanitized waterfront development, and the people said, no, it's not going to happen like that. And it was a huge fight. There were lawsuits, there everything else. But if you went to Canal Side, which was the area that was under dispute now, you'll find ruins there. You'll find lots of history about what happened there. And it's been authentically restored to what it was. And it's still a wonderful space that we can use for public gatherings, concerts, what have you. And that was something that people here were not about to stand for something that could be found in any other waterfront city. They wanted something that related to the history of Buffalo. And that was really the start of our waterfront redevelopment, which is probably between public sector and private sector funds, it's probably in excess of $1 billion right now. And areas that were just abandoned and dirty water and everything else, people recreate on that land all the time. Housing has gone up, nice housing on either side of the Buffalo River. It's just a revelation.
It's amazing how much having a waterfront re-energizes a town or a city. It feels like everywhere you go, if you've got a waterfront, people want to move in.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. We have 20% of the world's fresh water flows by our front doorstep here.
That's amazing. I want to talk a little bit about technology, which is a big word, and it means something different to a lot of different folks. Your perspective when you hear technology, commercial real estate, and future, what comes to mind?
I think some caution because I look at a building like what we have here, the Brisbane building, it's 125 years old. And I think you have to find technologies that work for a building of this age. Once you have that in the back of your mind, I think it's amazing what you can do in a building of this age, moving to new technologies and that type of thing. You can find the right fit. You can do some incredible things. And the technology is such that with some of the old technologies, you're just throwing money down the drain. And there's no need for that. We can significantly reduce the carbon footprint of this building utilizing new technology. That's very exciting to me. I've been in the energy business for the last 40 years, and I think there's some incredible things that have come along.
Particularly being in New York, New York City, close to the financial markets, ESG is all the rage these days. See it on every other copy of the Wall Street Journal I open. You claimed, in our introduction, that you are a self-proclaimed pragmatist.
Mhm.
How does a pragmatist look at the new ESG mandates coming down?
There's not a lot of common sense applied to them. It's more of a, I hesitate to say this, but somewhat of a political movement that's not based in common sense. As I mentioned to you before, it sounds like what our political leaders want us to do is to utilize electricity solely for power needs. And yet, a source like natural gas is far more efficient in producing heat than electricity is. And electricity has to come from another source. It doesn't happen by itself. So, what are those sources? Are those sources efficient? Is it, even though energy might be considered green, is it actually clean? Those are some very interesting questions. We're sitting on the Marcellus Shale here, which is probably one of the largest, not the largest, natural gas deposit in the United States. And our governor has decided there's not going to be any fracking. I don't understand it because fracking has reduced our carbon footprint more than anything else over the last 10 or 15 years because we're burning clean natural gas as opposed to oil. And it's just absolutely fantastic. And I don't know, I've done a fair amount of research into fracking and the, the stuff that they talk about, like it's introducing gas and the water supply and everything, it's a bunch of bunk. I just think natural gas is fantastic. I think it's something that could be a bridge to something in the future. And I don't know that technology exists right now, but why we're not using something so obvious as natural gas that's so much cleaner than what we used to use. Buses driving around Buffalo right now that are powered with liquid natural gas. And I'm a guy that commuted by bicycle for 30 years. I can tell you something. You ride your bike behind one of those diesel buses, it's not a pleasant experience. Natural gas bus, it's nothing. It's just going down the street. There's nothing that you can see. Anyway, I'm sorry. I probably got off track there a little.
No, I tried riding my bike to work for one summer in New York City and never did it again. The sweating through the suit was not a good look for me.
No, you got to have a shower at the office.
Something that struck me in several of the things you've mentioned here is how the services, the products that you and your team configure, they reflect the underlying needs, wants, desires, preferences of the local community and tenants. You mentioned you just came off of a tenant council meeting. Anything interesting from there you can extrapolate for just how your tenants are thinking about this volatile time?
First of all, we hadn't seen them in quite some time. We haven't had a face-to-face meeting in over a year's time, and we try and get together on a quarterly basis, and it's nice to get to see people again. So I don't know if the interchange is what it normally is in those meetings, but I think it's very important to communicate with our tenants, let them know what's going on, because a lot of the things that we do are behind the scenes and people don't understand all the work that we do to get to a certain point. So I think it's important to share with them what we're doing, how we're working on their behalf, how we're trying to run the building efficiently. We went over with them a lot of the steps that we took to make the building safer for them to come back into. It's like going in the time machine because we completed most of these steps 10 months ago. And this was the first opportunity we had to actually face-to-face talk to these people and say, look, here's what we did to make sure that your people felt comfortable coming back to the office. And I think that was much appreciated. We have to stay up to date with the mandates in the state and that type of thing because I think things have changed. We've learned a lot more about this virus than we knew initially. I don't think that people really appreciated that probably 95% of the virus is transmitted via air and people speaking or the virus particles being in the air as opposed to touch points. And we spent a tremendous amount of time and energy cleaning with disinfectants and providing disinfectants at elevator landings and that type of thing. And I think that was a smart thing to do initially. But when you look back at it now, I think they're saying that one, your chances of contracting coronavirus from touching something are 1 in 10,000. So we should be concentrating on airborne virus particles, but we didn't know that 10 months ago or 11 months ago. But beyond that, no, we advise them on what's going on around the building, infrastructure projects that are going to affect but ultimately make things much better are happening. So that's great. We talked about the energy management system and the energy improvements that we're making to the building. And hopefully that stuff wasn't flying over their head, because when I start talking about variable air volume boxes and variable frequency drives and stuff like that, to me it's very exciting. But to them, it's what the hell is he talking about? But they're simple things that can make a tremendous amount of difference in the amount of energy that's consumed by the building while maintaining the same degree of comfort or even better comfort in the building. And I think people really appreciate that because you took the time to speak to them. We're all very busy, but if you don't let people know what you're doing on their behalf, that's a huge mistake.
That's a great message just in general for life. Something I've been struck by in this conversation, the old adage is that real estate is local. And so many of the things you've mentioned convey a deep understanding of your market from, Buffalo's history in the early 1900s, sitting on shale, the waterfront, and 20% of water flowing through and around Buffalo, and using those assets to create a competitive city product, business, service. I think that's just fascinating. When you think about giving advice to younger people entering real estate or building their careers, and you think about those two ends of the spectrum, local, learning a market really well, understanding it in and out, and a breadth of experience a bunch of different markets, a bunch of different services. How would you advise young people entering the industry?
I think it's imperative that you understand the local market, what works, what seemingly doesn't work, but also keep a much bigger perspective because, as I mentioned to you before, we brought this national panel in 20 years ago to Buffalo. We were really down and out about the condition of downtown Buffalo. And one of the conclusions that these people mentioned was, you're complaining about all these obsolete Class B and Class C office buildings. Why don't you have anybody living there? And it was like a bolt of lightning, for God's sakes. And now that didn't happen overnight, but we all felt like a bunch of dummies sitting there saying, why didn't we think of that? But anyway, when the federal tax credits and the state tax credits came along, and you could get, in effect, a 40% discount to renovate these buildings, all of a sudden, all these beautiful historic buildings were totally restored, back on the market, lots of people living there, and then those people want to be able to walk to work. So it was a fantastic thing. Even now, a block away from here, there are 200 plus apartments being built, affordable housing units. They're affordable housing for people who are starting off in the workplace. So if somebody's making $35,000 or $40,000 a year, they'll find affordable rent. There's a parking ramp that's going to be demolished that will probably have somebody building either 200 or 300 additional units. Now, in New York City, in Chicago, that doesn't mean anything to anybody. But 400 or 500 apartments coming on the market, and we have a vacancy rate here of less than 5% of residential, that's fantastic, because then it puts pressure on the commercial market, because as I say, people want to be able to walk to work and hang out downtown and so on and so forth. So that's a rising tide lifting all the boats. You have to, I think, look at other cities and say, why not here? Now, there might be a very good reason why it doesn't work, but you look at, gosh, I grew up in Manhattan, and when somebody started talking about Battery Park City and people living in the Wall Street area, having grown up there, I just said, that's crazy. How could you do that? The story all came from the fact that they had to do something with the dirt that they excavated for the World Trade Center, so they created this landfill. What are we going to do there? We'll build apartments. You're nuts. Forget about it. And now, what a phenomenal area it is. And people can walk to work on Wall Street. But who knew? So I think you just have to keep an open mind, but understand your market. And we've done some amazing things here over the last 20 years in spite of ourselves. And I think it's worked out really well. People are pretty excited about what's going on here.
Yeah, there's a lot to be proud of. I'm sure it's been fun to observe. Steve, one last quick fun question for you on the way out.
Mm-hmm.
What color is the river today?
It's a beautiful shade of blue, Vivek. It looks great. And yeah, you're referring to the fact that when we had our industrial waterfront, we had a company there called Buffalo Color. And I think at one point, they probably dyed 90% of the jeans sold in this country. And the guys that were on the Cotter, it's actually the world's oldest fireboat here, they would always be cruising up and down the river looking for an industrial fire. But their running joke was, what color is the river today? And we don't have to worry about that. It's a pretty simple answer. It's blue and it's beautiful.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate the time.
You're quite welcome. Thanks, Vivek.
That's it for today. Thank you for listening. And, as always, a very special thank you to our guests. We'll be back soon, so please subscribe to Deconstructed on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. More details can be found at www.coworkspace.com/podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Workspace. Workspace has built a better way to manage real estate without all the clicks. With a suite of modern, intuitive products for commercial real estate operators, Workspace reduces the friction between assets, data, and people, allowing CRE professionals to streamline all their daily operations across property management, asset management, and beyond. Learn more at www.coworkspace.com.